So the goal now is to replace these dummy text widgets with the actual category data and widgets that present that category data. And for that, first of all, in the lib folder, I'll add a new models folder because I'll add a new file that contains the blueprint for the category objects with which we'll work. So I'll name this file in there category.dart. And in this category.dart file, I'll add a new class, category, which is not a widget, but just a blueprint for a regular object. And here I'll define how a category in this app should look like, how it should be structured. And of course, there are different ways of defining this, but for this app here, a category should have an ID, which should be a string. It should have a title, which is also a string. And it should have a color, which is of type color. So that's a Flutter specific type, and therefore we should import material.dart by importing package Flutter material.dart as we did it many times before. That's how a category should in general be structured. And of course, I'll also add a constructor function here, a const constructor function, which will be used to initialize these objects and set these properties. So in here, I expect to get an ID. I also expect to get a title. And I want to have a color, but there I'll actually set a default color of color orange. Like this, so that if no color would be provided, this fallback default color would be used. So that's how for this app a category should be defined. And with that defined, we can add some dummy data. For this, also in the lib folder, I'll add a data folder, and in there I'll add a new file, which I'll name dummy_data.dart. And in this file, I want to store some dummy categories, which we'll use for this demo app. And attached, you find my dummy.dart file that contains some predefined categories. So here I got a bunch of categories, and we must add an import to our category model to make this work, though the attached file already includes this import. There you just have to make sure that the project name in this import path matches your project name. But with that, we're importing the category model, and we're setting up all these categories, and we also need to import the material.dart file from Flutter, but again, this will also be already the case if you're using the attached dummy.dart file. And in there, in this dummy.dart file, you see that a bunch of categories are created, all with IDs and titles and colors. And it's these categories here that should now be output on the categories screen that is defined in the categories.dart file. Now to output these categories in this categories screen, I'll add another new folder in my lib folder next to data and models, which I'll name widgets. And the idea here is that I put all non-screen widgets into this widgets folder. And therefore I'll actually create another folder on the same level as data, models, and widgets, which I'll name screens, because all my screen widgets should now go in there. So I'll move the categories.dart file into the screens folder, and in the widgets folder, I'll create a new category grid item.dart file. And this is simply a file that will contain a widget which we'll then use in this grid for a single category. So that we don't end up with one huge widget here, but we instead outsource the category grid item logic into a separate widget. So with that, in the category grid item.dart file, we have to create a new class for this category grid item, so for this widget. And this does not have a screen because it won't act as a screen. But it should of course extend stateful or stateless widget, and indeed here we will have a widget that will not need to manage any internal state. And therefore this can and should be a stateless widget, and of course you must add that material.dart import as always. And we have to add this build method and also as always of course our constructor function here. Now we should accept and forward the key parameter, but in addition this class here, this widget class, should also accept some external data that will be required to output the actual category information. Indeed, in here, I simply expect to get the category for which I want to display information as an input of type category. And therefore, you must make sure that you add the correct import to your own project package, and then there to models category Dart, so that this category type is available because the category class is defined in that file. And of course, then here I also expect to get this data as an input. Here I'll expect it as a named parameter, but as always, you could also go for a positional parameter instead. But here I'll go for a required named parameter, which also has the name category and is then automatically set to this property. And with that, we can return our widget combination for this category grid item widget. A combination that should simply display the category title, use its color, and also make sure that the item will be tappable so that later we can navigate to a different screen, because ultimately that's what this section is about.